Bournemouth have set the stall out for what clubs can achieve. Nothing is impossible in football.
You know, football clubs run by the local butcher, baker or candlestick maker. That was how it was.
The winter gardens and people, putting money in buckets and all this, it's just remarkable. Because if people hadn't put the money in buckets, we wouldn't have a football club anymore.
We aren't the biggest football club in the world. We're not the biggest football club in England, and certainly not in the Premier League. But what we have is a community spirit that has been born from years and years of turmoil.
I grew up in this area and I was the only boy in my class that supported Bournemouth as a kid growing up. And it's proper commonplace now. Never, ever thought I'd see Premier League football at Dean Court.
Lived there all my life, was born less than a mile from the ground. It's a holiday town. It's seaside, beach, not football. Not a football town. Hi, I'm Paul. I run in off the Far Post football memorabilia shop in Folkestone. Bournemouth had never threatened anything like, we're going to be. The plans had never come out, we're going to be a top flight club, or we're going to be a steady Division 2 club. It was never like that. They swapped between 3 and 4. That's all they did. I think the first ever promotion was 70-71. Yeah, from 4 to 3. We'd been relegated, obviously, from Division 3 to Division 4, but that's the first promotion. And then this is the 6th season in the Premier League. You never saw the kids wearing Bournemouth shirts. There was no memorabilia to collect. People obviously bought the programmes. You'd see the odd shirt and scarf, but not a football town.
My first game was us parading, I believe it was Oldham, a 2-2 draw on a Tuesday night at the old Dean Court. And Harry Redknapp and the team were parading around their championship trophy. What it would be the equivalent of the League One trophy. So you could say I was a bit of a Glory supporter from day one, really. Didn't see an awful lot of silverware thereafter for quite some time.
I've been around here since 72, and when there were crowds here, 2,000 or 3,000 people coming to the games, It's not a hotbed of football, we mustn't kid ourselves, it is, But since Premier League came and, the team has just been amazing. It's a great atmosphere at the games, and it's not. I couldn't sit here and I'd be lying if I said it was a hotbed of football.
It was so antiquated at the old Dean Court. I remember being taken on a tour as a junior cherry where you go into the changing rooms and it's absolutely awful, it's antiquated, and I think I had a season ticket as a junior cherry, which was like 30 quid. You got this white plastic card, and quite often people would share it with their mates by shoving it under the Jubilee Gate, and they'd go round. At that point in time, sorry, Ken Gardner, who was the chairman at the time.
My first real memory was the Grimsby game, the Auto Windscreen final, because that was the first season I started going, watching football, and then we're at Wembley, and I remember my dad said, this is not what normally happens with Bournemouth. My dad was one of them, which unfortunate now was you're a Bournemouth fan, you can't do anything about that, which, to be honest, I wasn't too fond of for a while, but I'm glad now he made me do that, yeah, for sure.
You have to realise they'd never been in the Championship in 100 years of their history, Division 3 and Division 4, but they'd spent their whole life, so to get into the Championship I thought was a miracle. And when I managed the club, we won the league, got into the Championship, and I thought no one will ever beat that again. It was incredible. So to see them in the Premier League now, it's been an amazing turnaround. I played with John Bond at the end of his career. John was a great player for West Ham for many, many years. He got his first job in management as manager of Bournemouth. Mr. Walker was the chairman. Bournemouth were a club that at the time were on the up. People like Ted McDougall, Phil Boyer were fantastic players. John brought a lot of good players here. And the plans, Mr. Walker was a very ambitious chairman, local man, lovely man. I came down and could see where the club wanted to go, and for a couple of years, they got promoted out of Division 4 with John, then we were in Division 3, and the club had real good players, and it was a team John was a forward-thinking manager, bright young manager at the time, and the future of the club looked good. And in fact, when John left and went to Norwich, he took half the team with him, and they all went on to play in the top division, Division 1, Premier League as you call it now, we call it now. But it was still the same top division. So that was how good the squad was. People like Mel Machin and David Jones, Tony Powell, Phil Boyer, Ted McDougall all ended up going to Norwich. John Sainty all went to Norwich and played with John there. It was different then. All the players came from England or Scotland, but mostly, in the lower leagues, you only signed English players. So every night of the week, I'd be out watching games. We did well with non-league players. It was an area that we worked hard to look at. Brought people in here like Efan Akuku came here. Sean Chill went on to be a great player at Aston Villa. But then the club was in a poor state for many, many years. It was very difficult here. Going up to play Darlington on a York on a Wednesday night and Darlington on a Saturday, and saying to the chairman, it's such a journey up to Darlington and York. We've got to go to York, come back from York on a Wednesday night, middle of winter, get back at 4 and 5 in the morning, and then we're back up again to Darlington on a Saturday. Can we not stay up? And he said, Harry, we can't afford it. We were struggling. The time we paid for the coach. So we hired 2 minibuses, old, green, cheap minibuses. So when we pulled up at Darlington and York in minibuses, we said, I've got the team here, mate. He went, oh yeah, pull another. Who are you? He thought we were supporters. I said, no, it's the players, and took a lot of persuading that we were actually the team in these 2 old minibuses. Came back with 6 points, I think. We might have drawn at York, a tough game at York, they were a good side. Then we won at Darlington on the Saturday. We sung all the way back on the minibus. Keith Williams, who's my assistant, was driving 1 minibus, and probably John Kirk, was a great servant to the club, John Kirk, a fantastic man. Him or Nimbus, Ken Sullivan, another great servant to this football club. Great guy. They would have drove the other minibus, and we all piled in, and coming back with 3 points, stopped me for a bit of fish and chips, about a 6-hour drive back, and that was my punishment. If they didn't play well, I wouldn't let them have fish and chips. No fish and chips today, you were crap today, That was it. That made them play, that was their bonus really, that fish and chips on the way home. At the start of the year, I thought it was another year of mid-table really, and then I brought Trevor Aylott in, and he gave us a focal point. He played up front, Trevor, held the ball, great target man. And then we got to Christmas, we were there or thereabouts, and I've made 2 fantastic signings. I brought in John Williams at centre-half, who was fantastic, great for me. Big Willow was a leader, £20,000, he just magnificent character. And I brought Richard Cook in from Tottenham, who was a great little winger, gave us pace and, beat people and got crowds off their feet. And I had him on one wing and little Mark O'Connor on the other wing, who was an outstanding, clever footballer. Mark, really bright footballer, brain, and could really play. So I had a backbone, I had a good group of players, they were great lads. Great spirit. Everybody said they'll never do it. They'll never get out of Division 3 or 4. It's impossible. It's been 100 years. It won't happen, There was some old wives' tale that the council didn't want championship football here, and they would stop you doing it. So I don't know how they were supposed to stop you doing it. I mean, they're going to walk in the dressing room and say you're not supposed to win today, but I don't know but that's what people honestly believed in. So very strange, but no, to actually get over the line and get promoted was a great day for us, and they were a great bunch of lads as well. Suddenly we're playing teams that we never dreamed of playing. We spent our whole life playing Rochdale and Stockport, no disrespect to them, and teams in the 3rd or 4th division, And suddenly you got Chelsea coming here and, Newcastle and all sorts of teams. It was great.
The town was buzzing when they got promoted to Division 2. There was a few massive games in the late 80s. Newcastle were here. I remember the Chelsea game, they won 1-0. Ken Bates had said previously in the paper, playing teams like Bournemouth's going to be like playing teams in the 4th division. Bournemouth won 1-0 and the whole ground was singing, "We're only 4th division." Unbelievable. But yeah, there's some big games, Man City, Newcastle. It was great, but it didn't, 2 seasons and back down to Division 3. So, but it was good times.
So Harry Redknapp had this most incredible moment whilst he was the Bournemouth manager. He took them to places they'd never been before. And when, unfortunately, Harry left, things started to decline. And through the 90s, the club was just bumbling along. And it was on the turn of 1997, actually, where things became apparently a lot worse than the fans realised. The club was struggling day to day financially. There was no money in the bank. Staff members were being made redundant. And it got to the stage where the receivers turned up at the football club unexpected. There was heavy debts. The Inland Revenue were asking for money that just wasn't there. And it got to the stage where just before the Bristol City game, fans were going to the match thinking, this is the last time I'm ever going to see my team play, because the noises that were coming out of the football club were that they couldn't go on any further. You know, it wasn't a case of they had days left, they had just hours left. After that Bristol City game, the fans came together and they just tried to do something. And the Winter Gardens was essentially a lifeline for the football club. They held a meeting at the Winter Gardens where fans turned up from all over the local community. The players were there. The manager, Mel Machin, was on the top table in tears. Eddie Howe was there. The captain, Matt Holland, was walking around with a bucket to try and raise as much money as possible. And that was the lifeline that they needed, because the club was literally about to go bust.
I was there at Winter Gardens as a teenager. Perhaps I was a bit naive because I was young. Maybe it was this serious. But I remember just thinking, well, this is what I punctuate every week by. Like, if this goes, what have I got? I was genuinely scared that night. I remember chucking my pocket money in. I remember my dad giving some money. He was out of work at the time, and my mum was out of work, but we still chucked some money in the bucket.
Everyone remembers the buckets. There was, I hadn't been in the shop long, first couple of years. There was a guy that came in who'd made a load of stuff, like Ted McDougall badges and all stuff. And this was all sold around the time so that he could put money in the buckets. So he sold all these postcards he'd made and everything just to put in the buckets to save the club. So there was loads of little things that were done around the time to generate the money. But yeah, it's an amazing story, isn't it, that everyone packs the Winter Gardens just to keep a club going.
Thank you to every single person, from my prerogative and everyone else's prerogative, watching this. Because if people hadn't put the money in buckets, we wouldn't have a football club anymore.
It was quite an emotional sort of coming together of so many Bournemouth fans, and there was a lot of energy in that room. I'll always remember Trevor Watkins being on the stage, and all the players coming out that hadn't been paid for ages, the likes of sort of Matt Holland, Ian Cox and like many more like club stalwarts. And it was one of these sort of defining points in the club history, really.
When I look back at the old Dean Court and the jobs we used to have to do, we used to have to almost put water down on the floor before we hoovered it or brushed it, because the carpets were that old, it would kick up dust all over the stadium. So I saw the worst of it. I think we used to have to clean minibuses, but that was just a norm. That was a normal thing to do. And with Mel Machin and John Williams, manager and assistant manager, really good old school values, which taught me a lot. Sean O'Driscoll's a youth team manager, again, almost ahead of his time, fantastic coach, really made you think as a footballer, and there's no coincidence how many players that he brought through that youth setup and then into the first team that have gone on to either coach or manage themselves. I think that's partly down to the way that he got players to think about the game. But yeah, no, we saw some dark times, obviously not knowing if you're getting paid, those sort of things hanging over your shoulders, but sticking together, I think that was in abundance. Some of the players that we had in the squad, some fantastic footballers, but Also, off the pitch, stuck together, and there was a real good team ethic. I signed as a 15-year-old, like the usual YTS 2-year apprenticeship. I think £36 a week, that's what it is back then. But a great grounding for any aspiring young lad wanting to try and make it in a professional game, because it teaches really good values. Thoroughly enjoyed my time at Bournemouth and had a lot of really good pros to learn from. And the management team at the time, and Sean O'Driscoll and the youth team, it was a really good upbringing. We weren't too sure whether we was going to get paid, and we sometimes got paid like a week late or a few days later. And at the time, I didn't really have many commitments at the time, so I was quite relaxed on that. Whereas a lot of players were relying on paying mortgages and things like that. So yeah, it was a bit of a worrying time. I think the ambition when I was there was survival, and I think previous to that, selling one or two players, which like Mark Ovendale, Steve Robinson, those sort of types of players kept the club going. The stadium was falling apart. We obviously behind the scenes, the changing rooms, like I say, the hallways, the boot rooms, it was almost an impossible task to keep it clean. It really was, and that was a daily task that we used to have to do as YTS kids. So I was glad to see the back of it. So I had fond memories there, but to actually return back to the Fitness First Stadium, which is what it was called back then, I think it gave everyone a little bit of a boost, the town, the club, and although only 3 stands were built, I think it was something that had to happen.
I always felt like we are very small when we're a little club, and I didn't think it needed to be too much bigger, to be honest. I mean, obviously now in hindsight it's easy to talk about, but back then it just felt as it should.
Yeah, I think the average attendance back in those days, there would often be attendances of like 3,000, 4,000, maybe on a good day, like on a Boxing Day fixture against a local rival like Gillingham or something like that, Brighton, we get 6,000.
Yeah.
And I think when it was built, obviously just the 3 stands, I think the capacity was 9,600. I'll always remember that. The Fitness First Stadium as it was at the time. I think 9,600 was probably about right, and knowing that we could add a 4th stand.
Yeah.
We thought that the 3rd tier was probably our ceiling, maybe the 2nd tier at that.
I just remember thinking, this is it, this is Bournemouth, this is what we've got. And as you say, Miles, I never felt we'd ever really probably get like championship football, to be honest. So the tier below that was always felt like that's where we can go. If we can go on a little run to maybe try and get in that top 6, then great. So I think from that point of view, that means that that sort of stadium and facilities is probably where we're going to get to, and that was okay.
I think at the time, I think anything was an improvement on what we had. And like I say, the stadium was falling apart. And to go there and actually have some freshness, some new changing rooms, a half decent pitch, almost dismissed, the bank which was behind the goal. And
it was only 3 sides as well. Never quite got around to finishing it. But money was always tough for all clubs in League 1, League 2. So the ground was enough at the time. Obviously, financially, it probably cost the club too much, which is why they ended up having to sell it. And then he just thought, we'll be hovering 3 or 4 for the next 50 years, because that's what happens, isn't it, with League 1, League 2 clubs.
Playing in the first game was what everyone wanted to do. At the time, there was a lot of competition for places in that middle of the pitch. I think we had Cole Fletcher, Richard Hughes, who was at the time just coming back from injury, and Stephen Purchase. So I sort of almost passed a late fitness test leading into the game, and obviously against Wrexham. And the first 25 minutes, I was having a bit of a stinker, I'm not going to lie. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to probably get dragged at half time here. I'm not really fully fit. But everyone's dream was to, at the time, play in that first game at the stadium. And although it was never sort of said anything about trying to score the first goal, I think that sort of almost sank in after the game. But yeah, delighted to score the first goal. Obviously winning 3-0. Again, 3 good goals actually on the day, with James Hayter and Jason Tyndall also scoring. But yeah, flashbacks of Warren Feeney running in behind as he does, and really good bit of awareness from Derek Holmes to lead the ball for me to then put it into the opposite corner, which was obviously buzzing about.
2003 was probably one of the most significant moments in recent times of the football club, because it brought the good times back to Dean Court. Off the back of the relegation in 2001-2, the club had a tough challenge to try and rebuild once again, but with the manager Sean O'Driscoll, who had a plan, had a project and a process, and wanted to implement a very clear DNA and playing style in the football club with this young group that had just been relegated. There were some really exciting times around the corner. I remember back in 2002-03, the season actually didn't start very well. They had just been relegated, and after a number of games, they were hovering around the bottom 4 or 5 of what was then Division 3. And I remember the chairman, Peter Phillips, going to Sean O'Driscoll and coming up with this ultimatum. You've got 6 games to save your job. And Sean O'Driscoll accepted the ultimatum. It was plastered all over the local papers and the newsreels that Sean O'Driscoll was under pressure and that he needed to turn things around. And it was from that moment, that ultimatum, where you saw a very different set of players. You saw an energy and a belief from the group. The results started to come. Alan Connell, who was a young, essentially a free transfer from Lilleshall exit trials, came to the table and announced himself in the Football League with a number of brilliant goals. This young, blonde-haired bombshell came in and became the darling of Bournemouth for that season. Unfortunately got injured later on in the campaign, but he was a huge part of the beginning of the 2002-03 season that sort of sparked that energy and life that then catapulted them into the playoffs, then of course the Millenium Stadium, and then ultimately promotion back to where Bournemouth fans felt they belonged, which was the 3rd tier of English football.
We was a really, really good team, really good lads, great atmosphere amongst the camp. And I remember coming off the bench, which again, thankful for, because Sean O'Driscoll again giving me the opportunity to sort of play my part in the final. Although the game was won, almost dead and buried, having destroyed Lincoln at the time through some fantastic football which we played, not just then but throughout the season. And just the party atmosphere, winning the game, celebrating with the fans, coming off the bus, going into the town, celebrating with all the supporters. You know, it's almost like that togetherness throughout the whole town, which I have fantastic fond memories with that. And promotion was what everybody wanted that season, and to achieve it in the manner that we did, I don't think there's a better way to get promoted than what we did.
But it was after the game, I remember coming down the press box into the stand, and I was with a couple of other members of the press team, and we got into the lift at the Millenium Stadium, pushed the button to go down to the tunnel, and there was about 5 seconds of silence, and then we just erupted because we had done it 5-2, you know, on the biggest stage with the Sky cameras and everyone watching. And after so many difficult years at the football club, this felt like a moment, and we were jumping and dancing. The lift was shaking. It was the most incredible moment, and I still remember it vividly right now. We went down to the tunnel, walked into the dressing room. Everyone was buzzing. The energy, the atmosphere was just incredible. Everyone did all their post-match duties. And as I normally did at that time, if I didn't travel up with the team, I'd always come back with the team. So jumped on the bus at the Millenium Stadium. I remember we walked out of, we were led out by the police escort from the stadium, and I remember looking around and everyone was just loving every moment. That was one of those moments in life where you go, this doesn't happen very often, and I'm going to soak up and remember every second of this. And what happened was, I can't remember who it was at the time, but the trophy we had on the bus. But for whatever reason, someone went around and filled it up with any alcoholic beverage they could find. So there was vodka, there was wine, there was beer. It went round the whole bus. And I was so lucky and privileged at the time that I was a small, very, very small part of what was going on. And the cup came to me. I took my sip out of the cup. I don't know what was in it, just a mixture of alcohol. And then it carried on around the bus, the kit man, the physio, the manager, not the coach driver. Everyone had a sip and straight to the nightclub at the time that was the nightclub to go to, which was Elements. Walked into the VIP bar and there was 11 bottles of champagne on the counter. And then everyone just had the best time of their lives. And I think even if you speak to any single player from that era, 2003 and that promotion to the Millenium Stadium and the celebrations that followed were probably some of the greatest moments of their career. The one unique thing about Bournemouth is the community spirit. The football club was saved in the late 90s by the fans. The football club's fans got together to sign a number of players in 2001, 2, 3, 4. The football club's fan base put the money up to re-sign Eddie Howe as a player. And it's those moments where you just realise how important and how vital the community is to the football club. And that's replicated by a lot of the work that gets done by the football club, particularly as a Premier League side. There are a number of initiatives that they are at the heartbeat of when it comes to reaching out to the local community.
Hi, I'm Morgan. Been supporting the Cherries for a number of years. Been lucky enough so far to represent them for their ability counts, which, if anyone doesn't know, is a disability team. So you can have either a physical disability or an academic disability. I have both. I have mild autism and dyspraxia, which is a coordination difficulty from the brain. So the opportunity that I have had personally, and I know others have had, it's just remarkable. It's not just going to the games and watching them home and away. It's, you know, the ambassador stuff, going overseas to like Germany, and you know, and it's just things like that make me. I wouldn't be the person I am. You get one life, and you know, most people make the most of every opportunity given, and there's all sorts of stuff going on all the time. I think they run sessions pretty much every night. You've got walking football, you've got the mental health football, you've got the disability football, power jam football. I could go on all day. There's a lot going on, so it might sound a bit cheesy to some people, but I think it's really paramount in a football club. Anything together is possible, and I think that's what AFC Bournemouth have been about for the last, 10 or so years at least, if not even longer than that.
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm a Bournemouth fan. I have been for about the past 3 years, and I'm also Bournemouth's Her Game 2 ambassador. Her Game 2 is not just about the fans though, it's about the women that work in the club, it's about the women's team, and it's about helping people feel welcome, but also championing women that already work in football.
And I think what you see is a football club that is open and welcoming football. It's inclusive, it's diverse. And what you see from a lot of the campaigns that they do is they want every single fan to feel special and to feel connected to the club. And that's thanks to the work they do and the fan base that exists. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths of Bournemouth fans. Whilst there isn't many of them in numbers, they are more than together for everything that goes on at that football club. And I think that's a key thing moving forward. And I think that's been a key thing and definitely, without question, is a key link to their success over the last 20 years. There is one fan, sadly no longer with us, that will always be an icon in the North Stand. And you feel his presence at every game. Obviously, you still hear his voice at every game.
He came just a couple of weeks before he passed. 2 or 3 weeks he came to a game, and somebody had a word in my ear and said, that's probably the last time we're going to see him. But still had that glint in his eye and that smile.
He used to come in lots and we chat about football and stuff. I think it's a fitting tribute, the Red Army. I can still remember the goosebumps in the first one. Unbelievable. So and it's brilliant that they keep it going. I think it's part and parcel of it now. But yeah, he loved AFC Bournemouth.
You know, that whole Nolly thing speaks to and about those characters who we might not even know by name, but who we bump into and reconnect with every week at the stadium. And for me, there are loads of people. I'm very fortunate in that respect. But you know, I remember going as a fan, and there would be the same. And I still see her now. She was a little old lady when I was a kid, so goodness knows how old she is now. But the little old lady that would sit along from me, the lady who would sell me a cushion going into the main stand as a child. The guy that would sit a few rows along would always bring sweets and would share them out. the guy that would consistently moan about Harry Arter whenever he misplaced a pass. Those connections, they exist, and we revisit them along with the players and the team. We revisit them every week as well. There's something special about that, and the fact that we've been able to commemorate Nonny in the way we have, I think is, it's great.
The season at -17 is quite incredible in football terms. And that season we started with Kevin Bond as the manager, and at the time I was working for Kevin Bond as chief scout. So I had worked with Kevin the season before when unfortunately we'd been relegated, but again that was due to the points deduction. But the season didn't start off particularly well, and things were really tricky. And I remember there was a bit of a swell about Kevin Bond's position. New owners had come in, Sport 6 as they were known at the time, which was Paul Baker and Alistair Savramuto, and they clearly had a plan for the football club, and the plan didn't include Kevin Bond. And I remember having the meeting with Savvy, Alistair Savramuto as he was known at the time, and he said, we're going to make a change. We're going to bring in Jimmy Quinn. And I was like, okay, fine. This is someone who the club didn't really know about, had a modicum of success at Cambridge, had a little bit of experience as a manager, obviously a reasonable playing career, and had then obviously come in to replace Kevin Bond. And it was at that moment where Kevin Bond being fired, I remember being at the stadium and just before the meetings where they were about to be told that they were going to lose their jobs, Kevin Bond, Rob Newman, his assistant, and a new first team coach, some chap by the name of Eddie Howe. And they were there. All of them were there, taken into their meetings. They were sacked. And I remember being in the stadium afterwards, and Eddie was emotional and he was upset, just been sacked for the first time in his career, and this was his football club. And I remember Savvy coming to me the day after and saying, what do you think? What are the fans saying? What's the reaction? Because at the time I was working for Kevin Bond free of charge, but I was also doing a bit of consultancy, PR and media stuff for the football club, just to try and help out the new owners and obviously the sort of start of a new era. And he said, well, everyone understands Kevin Bond being sacked, but no one can understand why you're getting rid of Eddie Howe. He's a club legend and, an icon for Bournemouth. He said, well, okay, why don't we bring him back? I said, yeah, if you can find a way. I think it was 2 or 3 days later that they employed Eddie Howe again after sacking him as a first team coach, as the Centre of Excellence manager, as the academy manager, as someone to spearhead the system, because he'd come through that very system. But I always remember that emotional moment where Eddie had been sacked and he was in the stadium and it was empty. But that was the moment where he'd lost his job and was out of work. But he didn't know that 72 hours later he'd be back at the football club.
It was all doom and gloom, wasn't it? Bailiffs came in, cleared the club shop out, took everything that was worth any money. So I think people thought then that it might go.
The bailiffs came in to collect all the kit from the shop. It was just a nightmare. Various court cases going on. Taxman was a regular on the phone.
But I know it was going down to the wire, wasn't it? That the club was. Yeah, the club was going. Was it on Meridian at the time? And they were all, it's going to go. We're live or whatever. The club's going to fold, and all of a sudden, no, it's not.
I feel for Jeff Mostyn in some ways, because he went into that press conference telling his wife that, look, I'm not going to invest any more money. And then at the start of that press conference, it's been widely documented that Gerald Krasner, the administrator, he comes up to him and says, look, at some point in this press conference, I'm going to say, are you willing? And it's either a shake of the head or a nod. And so everyone's looking at him. He must be under so much pressure. And then he does it. I can't imagine what the phone call was like between him and his wife afterwards. Like, by the way,
I think he has said since that his wife went, I know you would. She knew that he was going to do it, which says everything you want about the man. He wasn't going to let us go down. No.
I watched it on the news like everybody else. And yeah, I mean, it's an iconic moment now, looking back. Incredible show of bravery on Jeff's part. Incredible leap of faith, really. And that helped lay the foundations for where we are now, for sure. Yeah.
And that was a big moment for us. It was huge. It felt like there were so many stays of execution over the year. You sort of expect there's going to be more, so it wasn't that complete sigh of relief. This is okay, because you think, probably in a year's time, 6 months' time, there's going to be something else.
But again, nobody expects, do they? You think, all it's done is prolong the agony for another week or another 2 weeks or 3 weeks down the line, because you want to believe that we're going to stay up, but you don't believe it until it's over the line, isn't it? Till it's done and dusted, because anything can happen in football. Absolutely anything.
It was New Year's Eve. I remember getting the call. So I found out I was at a New Year's Eve party, and I got a call from my brother, big Bournemouth fan as well. And I think firstly it was that Jimmy had been let go. It was more, probably shouldn't say this, it was more exciting that Jimmy had been let go than Eddie was being appointed. I loved Eddie. I saw the Eddie Share scheme to get, I remember that going through on the forums online and seeing the money cobbled together to get Eddie back as a player. He'd always been an absolute pleasure to deal with on match days. Just a lovely guy, and I was pleased for him. But in my heart of hearts, certainly didn't anticipate what would come next.
I remember him phoning me on New Year's Eve, and he phoned me. He said, "What's going on with Jimmy? What's happening?" I said, "Well, I think he's going to be sacked." He said, "What are they going to do? What direction they're going to go in?" And I remember saying to him, "Well, if they've got any sense, they'll give you the job." I didn't think that they'd give him the job, but they gave him the job. So he went in. I went down to Eddie's house New Year's Day and walked into the living room, and we had flip charts around the whole living room. And there was a flip chart for players to possibly sign, there was loan signings, there was other things. And it was just him and Jason who was going to carry on working at the club despite having come in with Jimmy Quinn, who'd obviously been sacked. And I just remember we were just going, how, what do we do and how do we do it? And I was thinking, I'm in far too deep to know what to do here, but Eddie had a plan. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was ready for this moment. And despite losing his first 2 matches, he got given the job. And I remember it was the game against Wycombe, who at the time were high flying, where they won 3-1. And Bournemouth and Eddie and everyone kind of looked at it and went, well, okay, something special could happen now.
When Eddie comes in, it's a new face, and it's someone who obviously wants to prove himself. Little did we know he was going to turn into what he did turn into. But when you check out the Daily Echo articles at the time, I think the headline was "Eddie's the man."
I'm a fan of ex-players who've got a real affiliation of a club going back and either being on the coaching staff or being a manager, because it means something to them. When you get lots of managers, not mercenaries, but will go to a club, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you're an ex-player from the town or you're a supporter's favourite, it'll hurt.
Be lying if I said, at the time I thought, Eddie will sort it all out. But it was obviously quite a pivotal moment. Wasn't
it? In some ways, it wasn't difficult for him to be loved, especially after what we'd been through with the previous manager. But because he hit the ground running like he did, it made him so easy to love. And some of his decisions that he was making, not just off the pitch in terms of like bringing certain players in, bringing players back, but in game as well. Hang on, there's something here. Yeah. There really is something here, and we could feel that even at that stage, something special was brewing.
Yeah.
Eddie was really clever, and he still is now. He keeps people around him that he can trust, and he obviously could trust Fletch, which is the reason why he brought him back, because he knew what he was going to get from him. He knew he was going to get the troops going one more time. So, it was a no-brainer, really, no-brainer.
Steve Fletcher was such a clever signing from Eddie. Obviously, he was playing in the conference at the time, wasn't he? With Crawley.
Under Steve Evans, I think.
Yes, that's right.
And he got the call, and Steve Evans didn't want to let him go, but realised this is how much it means to you. You got to go back.
Our biggest signing to that date was Steve Fletcher, and to get Fletch playing for us, it was fantastic. And we didn't want to put him in a travel lodge. He ended up staying with me a couple of times. I was staying at my house, so I got to know him quite well. And I think we played the PlayStation most nights. But as I say, the pure professional, didn't drink. No surprise that he is a legend at Bournemouth, and still is to this day.
It wasn't just for the footballing side. I think Eddie showed then his intelligence as a coach and as a football manager, that he went, I'm bringing the legend. The fans are going to be buzzing. We've just got the legend back in Steve Fletcher.
I think Eddie Howe's very happy for our manager Stevie Evans letting him go. But this is where his heart is. It was all between the gaffer, our gaffer, and Bournemouth's gaffer. That's where the deal was done, and that's where he went back to. But I think Stevie Evans left it up to Fletch really to say, if it's in your heart, you go back. He's not going to hold him back from going back to Bournemouth. And obviously there's no doubt that Fletch was itching to go back, even though he had a great time at Crawley. Bournemouth is where his heart is. And he came back, and it was written. It was written in the stars.
So I remember Lawrence Jones was our chief exec at the time, and he said to me, as you know what, as a few people have done down the years, players as well, you need to really go and G them up. We need them behind the second half. And more often than not, I sort of nod and smile and walk away thinking, I can only do so much. We're too down here, or it's pouring with rain and it's a miserable game, or whatever. But that he said, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna talk to the fans. Not the only time the chairman's done that. So I'm gonna go out there and talk to the fans. And I said, okay, well, we've got nothing to lose. Get out there. And he went out and gave a bit of a rip-roaring speech, did Lawrence. And I remember going back to my seat and thinking, please, please, please. Like, that's another layer now of we've got to stay up, because the poor guy's going to get castigated if not. And of course it came good, in dramatic fashion, and with the big man, as ever, at the centre of it all.
Yeah, it was fitting that he scored it, because it was just, and it was a decent finish as well, wasn't it?
What an incredible moment, and it was written in the stars, as you say, for Fletch to get that goal.
Of course Fletch got the winner at home to keep us up. Of course he did. It was the fairy tale of that season, and that's how it topped off. Of course he did. I mean, I always think with Fletch, he's known for his aerial ability because he just got his head on stuff. But when it mattered, you obviously go back to the Millenium Stadium. He scores like a half volley. He does it again against Grimsby. And you think he barely ever scored with his feet. Yeah, you look back on it and just think, of course it was Fletch. It was a massive moment. I remember just kind of pinched myself at the time and just couldn't believe it had happened. It's one of them things where, as you said, mate, I felt confident. I felt like we're going to stay up. But when that ball hits the net, you think, oh my God, we've done it. It was a really surreal moment, and then your mind starts going back to, oh my God, we nearly weren't in a club, and our decision to bring Eddie in, and this is just incredible.
Yeah, just more relief than anything. But as with a lot of these big moments that we've had down the years, there's a sense of momentum going into them, and there was that sense of momentum that you felt we would nick something. And actually, as it turned out, it was fairly comprehensive that day, and we stayed up.
So this one, signed by the big man himself, Mr. Fletcher. is the boot that scored the goal against Grimsby that kept them in the Football League. That's the other one, but that was for standing on. He didn't use that one very often. But yeah, so these things are a part of AFC Bournemouth history. Once that season finished, what were people's expectations for the next season? Because all they'd done is stay up, isn't it? I don't expect they sold any more season tickets for the following season, or they expected, we're going to end up with big gates the following season, because you've just stayed up. That's it. It didn't, and everyone went on their summer holidays going, shall I renew my season ticket or not? Or am I going to go next season or not? That's it. But then the journey from the next 4 or 5 years is proper fairy tale stuff.
Off the back of surviving the Great Escape, the greatest escape, and the Steve Fletcher goal, there was a real belief that Eddie Howe was building something around the football club. And I remember thinking during the course of the summer that this was the start of something special, and that Eddie Howe was clearly someone with talent that could take the club to the places it wanted to go. And that was, of course, getting out of the league that they were in at the time. But I remember thinking and feeling that there was something special, and that he could build a team that was capable of getting promoted. And he absolutely did that. That was a superb campaign for the football club. They won games, they looked dangerous, there was a togetherness about the group. And I think it's those scenes at Burton that will be fondly remembered. It's always weird when you get promoted away from home. But I remember Burton being so accommodating for our fans and for our players, knowing that if we'd got the results we needed, we would have been promoted.
I'll always remember certain times in the AFC Bournemouth timeline where we've played certain teams and the other teams' fans have been great, or like everyone's been so hospitable. And Burton Albion, I think, are one of a few clubs in my heart that's like, I always sort of look out for their results and think of that moment.
Yeah.
And I remember being one of the first on the pitch at full time when the referee blew his whistle. We all ran up, and it culminated in the best possible way. But
yes, man, great days. And I just remember those scenes and those moments where there was just such jubilation, but it was on foreign territory. But it was brilliant, and that was the start of it. That was the first promotion. That was the first taste of real success for the football club and for Eddie Howe. And that was the foundation for success, promotion and achievements that weren't about just avoiding relegation.
When Eddie Mitchell said that we were going to be one of the richest clubs in the lower leagues, I'd heard it all before. We'd had so many false dawns. So many people had taken the club for a bit of a ride, frankly, that naturally, I think as a fan base, we were all cynical.
You tend to imagine what you could do or where you would like to be, and I always imagined being associated with the club. Don't ask me why, there's no real reason. Somebody approached me about buying shares in Bournemouth, and I considered it. I talked to a few people in 2008, 51% of the shares became available. So I went over and looked at the club, looked at some of the documentation, but really didn't do any due diligence on it. And I just, throughout my life, just done things on the spur of the moment, on the cuff, and I decided that I'd have a crack at it. So I paid the guy what he wanted for the shares, not realising the enormity of keeping the club afloat. It had over £2 million worth of debt. And I went to the club with the keys. The team were playing away that weekend. So I took the opportunity to stay at the club virtually all day. I made sure I visited every room in the club, including the toilets, the ladies' toilets, just so that I could say to myself, I knew what I had taken on as regards to what work needed doing to the club, to the ground, should I say. Probably my second day or third day, I had a meeting with the manager, who we didn't see eye to eye at the first meeting. We had a stand-up row, had a bit of a swearing match. I think, he was new to management. It was his first season, full season that I gave him in management. And I think he expected me to come there with a pocket full of money to get the embargo lifted and get players in, which wasn't the case. So, yeah, I had money, but most of my money was in assets, really. So I explained to him I'd come to the club to do that, to get everybody working hard, and motivated, and that's what and create an environment which people wanted to come to. And I took a lot from that meeting, knowing that he was a strong character, and I felt I didn't have to worry about team matters. We were embargoed anyway, so yeah, we got on with things.
Eddie, really, I don't think he got the credit he should have got for what was achieved here. I really don't. He brought Eddie back here, Eddie Howe back, and he had a big part in what happened, I think.
The first thing I did on a match day was take my dog, who's old as me now. I'd take him down to the ground. We'd go out onto the pitch at the centre spot. And obviously he needed exercise and I wanted exercise, so we would sort of pretend to pass the ball to each other, run down to each goal and score a goal on each end. But that was our ritual, and he never once peed on the pitch. And he used to run around the pitch with me. And he played a big part in helping me, I think, understand the values of the club, and he certainly had his ears bent when I was trying to bring Eddie back from Burnley. It seemed that every time the phone went and there was negotiations ongoing, which were quite hectic, not particularly Eddie, but Jason's negotiations were quite difficult. And I'd be bending his ear, because he was walking alongside me. But yeah, that's what I did prior to the games, and then I'd turn up at 1 o'clock. You couldn't wait for the start, really.
Supporters are very, very passionate at Bournemouth.
Yeah.
As you know.
Yeah.
What was the time that you came onto the pitch?
It was a Chesterfield game, I think. We lost. I come down to greet the players in because I used to enjoy sort of being part of it and saying, well done,
Sure.
And they went down the other end to the North Stand, and actually I was so surprised the crowd were clapping them. So I thought, that's good. So I fell into an ambush, really. I walked down towards the players and started clapping, and then the crowd spotted me with a noise. The people that I wanted to tame a bit spotted me and saw me as a bit of a punching bag to take out their frustration. So they started shouting out abuse at me, and I just started to shout something back.
I saw it unfolding in slight disbelief, really. And he said, well, give me the mic. And I remember Stuart saying, oh, don't give him the mic. Don't give him the mic. And I was like, well, no. I mean, he's the chairman of the club. He's asking for the mic. Let's see how this plays out.
So he gave me the microphone, and I tried to, answer him back anyway. There's one bloke that was like hysterical. His eyes were popping out of his head, and I said, come on the pitch, tell me what's wrong. And I got ushered off by the stewards, and then that went down like a lead balloon in the paper.
Yeah, it was pretty painful stuff. But with all the stuff about Eddie Mitchell, and there were some negatives along the way, there were some pretty big bumps in the road. He laid some good foundations, and he brought Max to the club, which was a real game changer. And you have to give him credit for that.
I think that there were a few challenges off the pitch. I know that the chairman at the time, Eddie Mitchell, was a really passionate guy and wanted to be involved and wanted to have his say and wanted to be a part of the exciting part of the football club. And I think there was perhaps a bit of a clash between the two Eddies. And I think it got to the point where Eddie Howe just felt naturally that his time at the club had come to an end. He had achieved so much, and by this time, people in the footballing world were talking about him as an excellent coach and manager, and of course there were other clubs that were starting to look at him thinking, well, if you can have that success with no money, what about if you had a bigger club with a bigger budget? How much success could you have? And I remember there were a number of clubs that were linked to Eddie. I think Charlton was one of them. Crystal Palace was one of them.
He spoke to Southampton. I think they offered it, well, he said they offered him the job. He turned that job down, and then Burnley came in for him, who were in the Championship. Southampton were in the same division as us at the time.
And I remember basically a moment where Eddie had essentially agreed to go and become the new Crystal Palace manager. And he went up to the chairman, they had a long conversation, told him he was going to accept the Crystal Palace job, and the media were outside. The players were waiting in the dressing room at the Vitality Stadium, and Eddie had to come down and tell them that he was leaving, and then come out to the front of the stadium where there was gathered media, there was a load of fans, and there was just a bit of a melee and buzz of people. And it was on that journey from the chairman's office down to the players, to tell the players he was leaving to become the new Crystal Palace manager, that I think he had a change of heart. Now, Eddie Mitchell might be able to tell you that story a little bit better, but it was that moment walking down where he decided actually Crystal Palace wasn't the right job for him. He was going to stay, and he was going to carry on the project at Bournemouth. And I remember being out the front of the stadium with the gathered media, and it was a bit bizarre, but it was really iconic at the time. The chairman came out with Eddie Howe, and this wasn't a press conference, this wasn't, with a slick backdrop and sexy lights and all of the razzmatazz that you'd get with a press conference or an announcement that the manager was going to stay. It was just in the doorway to the entrance of the stadium with a huddle of fans and media. And Eddie Mitchell announced that Eddie Howe was going to stay.
And I was following it on social media and also the Bournemouth Echo website, and I was just refreshing. I was at my day job, and I just remember refresh. And then it was, he's not going anywhere. Like, fantastic, brilliant. We've managed to keep hold of him.
Little did we know that a couple of weeks later, Burnley would come in for Eddie Howe, and he would eventually leave. But I remember doing an interview with Eddie later on that day, and I remember thinking after the interview, it wasn't the greatest interview. Eddie's normally very good with the media, and he was a little bit cagey. And I phoned him later on that day. I said, Ed, that interview that we've just done for Sky Sports, would you rather it didn't go out? He said, yeah. I said, why? He said, I might still be going. I went, okay. So I then had to phone up my news editor and say, look, that nice interview we've done with Eddie Howe talking about how he's staying at Bournemouth? Can't run it. He said, okay, why is that? I said, well, I think he might still be leaving. He's turned down Crystal Palace, but I think there's another club that's in the background that want him. He went, okay, fine. So the interview never ran. And a couple of weeks later, he went to Burnley.
I knew it was going to be a big loss for the playing side of the club. But I knew the money that we got for him helped me progress the club by building training ground and things like that, new pitches and so on. So I thought, well, Lee Bradbury was coming to the end of his career, and Steve Fletcher was coming to the end of his career. So I'd actually phoned Eddie and asked him what he thought about Lee Bradbury being a manager and Fletcher's the assistant, and he said, well, it's completely different to playing. There's a lot more you got to put in, but who knows?
We played that card of inexperience, but club people, two really good people who really had the club at heart again. We just fell short that year. And I figured, well, that's it then. Back to League One, League Two, a bit of yo-yoing there, and that's our lot.
It wasn't a great end to the campaign. I remember getting into the playoffs, which was a huge success, but they weren't really geared up and ready for promotion from the division. And unfortunately, the playoff campaign ended against Huddersfield. And that was a moment where the club had to just try and retake what they were trying to do. It was a bit of a reset, because we'd had this hugely successful short spell with Eddie Howe as the manager, and this was the start of a new era. But after some time, it was clear it wasn't working. The players weren't on board, the fans weren't on board. It just didn't feel right. And it was at that moment you kind of thought, well, there's going to be a managerial change here. And at not one stage in that process did I think that Eddie Howe, who had left Bournemouth and had gone from earning X amount of money to earning 5 or 6 times that amount at Burnley, would then come back to Bournemouth.
It was well documented that his mum had been poorly, and he was missing home, and I think his family were missing home as well. I'd heard rumours, and you're checking the odds all the time as to see, who's favourite to come back, and the odds on Eddie just kept shortening and shortening. And I remember Chris Temple of BBC Radio Solent saying, "Oh well, yeah, it's not going to happen, guys. I'll come dressed as Elvis if he makes it back to Bournemouth." Well, he had to don the suit, didn't he? Yeah, absolutely overjoyed. He was my number one choice to come back, and I remember giving him a big old bear hug when I saw him. And he was all suited and booted, which was odd. I don't remember seeing Eddie in a suit very often. Very much the tracksuit manager. But that day when he was first unveiled, I remember going into, I think he was in like a physio room or something. But him and Jason were both there suited and booted. Just gave him a massive bear hug, and yeah, just told him how delighted I was that he was back. He'd heard it a lot that morning, I think. But I said it and I meant it. And yeah, I was buzzing. But at no point did I have expectations that he would get us promoted. Yeah, no way.
And dreams do come true. And quite remarkable a situation for a club like Bournemouth to be able to recruit a championship manager on championship wages, but find a way to make it work. But this was the start of something special. This was the start of a new era. This was the start of Eddie Mitchell trying to take the club to places it had never been before. And there wasn't this cloud over the football club of, oh, we can't do this and we can't do that, we can't afford to do this, we can't have the finances to make that work. Eddie Mitchell, for whatever reason, made it work. He got Eddie Howe back. And probably the greatest decision that Eddie Mitchell has ever made in his career was to try and bring Eddie back. And whatever differences they'd had when Eddie Howe had left had been settled and sorted, and they came back together to work together and build something. And I remember that season when Eddie came back, they were flirting with relegation, and it looked like a campaign that was going to end in disaster. And it just goes to show that Eddie's skills and quality as a manager transformed that club that was flirting with relegation into a side that got promoted to the championship.
I think he had great team spirit, and they were lads. I say they were people that had been around, and then suddenly had the opportunity to show just how good they was. And you looked at them and thought, my God, Simon Francis could play for England. Really, he was that good a player, I think.
I think the 21 months away, obviously with slightly better players, he learnt a lot. So bringing that back to Bournemouth, you could obviously tell it rubbed off on the players, didn't it? I think the gap probably did him good and the town good, because he come back. We didn't really have any expectations that we were going to get back into the Championship. We just thought, oh, we've got Eddie back. He's back. Bit of stability. The football will probably be a bit better. We'll see how we go. But all of a sudden, we're in the Championship.
He was already our most successful manager. He'd won more promotions than any other manager had in our history. So yeah, he'd already proved himself by the time we hit the Championship. That was job done as far as I was concerned, and I think most fans. But yeah, the brand of football we played in those 2 years in the Championship was, well, we'll probably never see the likes of it again.
And the first season of the Championship, only just missed out on the playoffs. So the expectations for the following season, I remember I took the shop in March 2014, so it was coming to the end of that first season in the Championship. I remember putting on Facebook at the end of that season, Bournemouth play like this, we're only 46 games away from the Premier League.
And I remember actually saying about that second season, no one really obviously expected promotion. I remember going to, do you know they used to do the fans forums and stuff, and I remember going to one. The mates always wind me up about it because I said a question from Tom from Parley, and that was me, and I said, would you take 10th again to Eddie? And he straight away said no. And that's when I thought, oh hello, and he said, yeah, I'd be a coward to take 10th again. And I thought, well, you're getting any higher, and then you're looking at the playoffs minimum, aren't you? So that kind of said it all and needed to about the man. But I don't know, I quietly felt, oh, you never know, but I didn't expect to go up.
Nobody ever thought in a million years that come May, Bournemouth would be champions of the Championship. So those 46 games went very quickly, and all of a sudden, they were Premier League footballers. Unbelievable.
Never, ever thought I'd see Premier League football at Dean Court. To see us on Match of the Day, to see us on FIFA, to see us in sticker books, match attacks cards, to see so many shirts around the town. You know, I grew up in this area and I was the only boy in my class that supported Bournemouth as a kid growing up. And it's proper commonplace now, not just in Bournemouth, but around the country, around the globe, to run into people that wear Bournemouth kit. So yeah, never in a million years did I think I'd see us in the Premier League.
But what you had is a really good group that were adaptable. You had an incredible manager that understood the direction of the players, and he built a philosophy that eventually, not the first season in the Championship, but the second season, was devastating for teams. They couldn't deal with the high press, the energy, the tempo, the quick fire football, the expansive possession-based game that Bournemouth had developed under Eddie Howe. And they become arguably one of the most exciting sides to watch that the second tier had ever seen. And that promotion from the Championship to the Premier League for the first time back in 2015 was probably one of the most incredible seasons of football collectively that I have ever seen. And the dreams, and I don't even think they were dreams from Bournemouth fans, to play in the Premier League suddenly became reality, and a destination that the club had never even thought about in its 100 plus years of history suddenly became reality. And we were mixing it with the big boys, and Eddie Howe was at the heart of that. We all gathered at the Vitality Stadium. We were then whisked off on these buses to the depot, and then we got on to the open top bus. I remember the weather was perfect, and I'll never forget the moment we came down Sea Road through Boscombe to turn onto the front, and there were just thousands upon thousands of people, and it was one of those moments where it takes your breath away, and you just realise the achievement of the club getting to the Premier League. We went down the promenade and just were soaking in the moment, and I was lucky to be a part of it. Now, I also felt a little bit of a fraud because I was on the top of the bus. Now, I was there to be on the microphone and to talk and to do interviews and to announce stuff, but I didn't feel like I deserved any applause from the fans. So I remember coming down and sitting on the lower deck, which was covered up, and just being there for a moment and thinking, wow, this is unbelievable. I've had my little moment. I've seen what it's all about, but I don't feel like I belong there, so I need to be away. And then we pulled up to just by Bournemouth Pier, went back up to the top deck, and this was the moment where we could celebrate the players. And I remember Eddie Howe saying to me, I think I need to grab the mic and I need to make sure that everyone is cheered and celebrated. And it was at that moment he grabbed the mic and he introduced his team, his backroom team, and every single player.
I don't want you to leave anyone out. I want to go through them all. Jan Kernigan, Callum Wilson, Fletcher. Okay, I still have two more to do. I'm sorry. Could be a long time.
and they all had their moment. And he was so instrumental in making sure that it was about everyone, not him and not the first 11. It was about the whole group.
Are you sure we're finished, Eddie? You sure? 100%. Please put your hands together once again for our manager, Eddie Howe!
And I'll never forget those moments, and probably one of the most special days of my life, standing on an open-top bus on the beach of my town with my club, celebrating the most incredible achievement that will ever be seen in the history of AFC Bournemouth. Because you'll never have a first promotion to the top tier. You won't ever have that for the first time, and that was that moment.
The past 7 years have been alright, but before that there's been lots of downs, lots of scrabbling around for cash, administration, all of that sort of thing. The club nearly went under, so to be here now, I mean, what a journey.
Everybody loves a comeback. Everybody who's saved the club, you know, obviously know about Jeff and previous chairmen and all the fans that put their hands in their own pockets to help us survive, and the players, you know, who played on that day to keep the club in existence, and what the gaffer's done for us is just amazing.
I think I looked that season, we were the 62nd biggest ground in the country, which is League One at best. Yeah, League One, top of League Two at best. Yeah.
So Eddie Howe's ambitions when he got to the Premier League were, of course, in the first season to survive and stay there and compete and be in every single game and continue to play with Bournemouth's philosophy and DNA. That was the most important thing for him, and you saw that in that first season. And obviously when you stay in the Premier League after one season, you think, right, let's see if we can do another one. And the ambitions didn't really change. I think it was after year 3 where it became more about staying in the Premier League than sticking to what had got us to the Premier League. Hence why there was a transition in seasons 4 and 5, which unfortunately meant the club got relegated. But every single season that they were in the top flight, they wanted to improve, they wanted to get better. Eddie Howe often used to break down chunks of games, so he'd have a chunk of 6 games, and that would be chunk 1, and they'd expect a minimum number of points, minimum number of goals, and they wanted to try and just break it down a little bit as opposed to have big reams of, you know, we need to get this many points in this many games. And it wasn't quite a one game at a time, it was little chunks of games. And that was something that he did throughout a large part of whilst he was the manager of Bournemouth. So that was very much the remit. But you saw throughout the seasons in the Premier League that there was constant improvement, there was constant investment, there was a development of young players, still trying to play attractive football. And the spine of the team remained for the majority of that time whilst they were in the Premier League.
You mentioned it right at the very start. It's made us feel like we're a bit of a football town now. We've got something massive there. We can keep growing from it, which obviously we're trying to do now. So it meant everything. I never felt we would ever be a Premier League football club. So to do it for that long, and then you always felt, which obviously has ended up happening, that even if we went down, we could come back again. So
we had a global presence. Yeah. Global presence. We quickly realised that maybe we're outgrowing our stadium that we've got here. But what a ride it was! I think obviously relegation was not helped by COVID, which had a massive effect. Not having the fans in the ground was huge for us, really. And I felt for Eddie by the end of it, because he did everything he could, but he did look like a tired man. But yeah. The legacy that provides in terms of the gravitas of the club is huge. Maybe didn't provide off the pitch what I thought we needed in terms of our bricks and mortar assets, but maybe that's to come.
You almost felt like the journey had just come to its natural end, and it always feels sad that it ended on that note. But that amazing journey that started back in 2008-9 in the lower reaches of League Two, when the club was on the brink of going bust, ended in that season. Not just one season in the Premier League, 5 seasons in the top flight. And I think if you'd said to any single Bournemouth fan, back in 2008-9, but certainly in 2015 when they got promoted, you'd be there for 5 years, 100% of them would have said, I'll take that and I'll love every second of it. And I know that summer was difficult for Eddie because he had a big decision to make. Did he want to stay on at the football club and try and take them back to the Premier League? Or was it time to let someone else have a crack and walk away from the most exciting era of the football club's history? And the decision, I think, took a long time, and he wrestled with it a lot, but eventually decided it was right to step down. But it was his decision. It wasn't a club's decision. He wasn't sacked. It wasn't mutual. It was completely his decision. He'd earned the right to call time on his AFC Bournemouth career. The fans loved him and still love him and will always love him, because if there was one person that was AFC Bournemouth and had Bournemouth at their heart, it was Eddie Howe. So at the back end of 2022, and after a summer of talk and speculation about the owner, Maxim Demin, and the future of the football club, finally I was able to break the news live on Sky Sports News that there was a new owner in place, and that the American billionaire and owner of the Las Vegas Golden Knights, Bill Foley, had agreed a deal with Maxim to take over 100% of the football club. And that felt like a really significant moment for the history of the football club, because Maxim had been such a huge part of the club, the journey, and had invested loads of money to take them to places that they'd never been before. So, yeah, that was a moment that you sit up and think, wow, what an incredible legacy he has left at the football club. But how exciting is the future now under someone that wants to take Bournemouth to even greater places than they'd already been. And very early on you could see from Bill Foley's enthusiasm and the times I spoke to him and interviewed him on Zoom whilst he was in America, and then of course in person in the UK, that he had big ambitions, not just for the football club on the pitch, but probably most crucially for Bournemouth, off the pitch as well. He wanted to improve and develop the work that had been done and started on the training ground. Maxim had acquired this incredible site over at Canford Magna, which is an old golf course, if you don't know, and just looks picturesque like all golf courses do. And imagine going to work every day as a footballer in an environment like that. So Bill could take on the mantle and take on the challenge that had been started. The foundations were there. It was just a case of having the funds in place to continue that development. And I think that's so exciting for the club, because the one thing that perhaps we didn't have from the 5 years in the Premier League was a big enough legacy. And the new ownership want to continue that and want to develop that, so that in many, many years to come, whatever division Bournemouth are in, they can look back and think, that time in the top flight paid for this and helped us to become a much bigger club.
Going to the development squad games and the under-18s in the FA Youth Cups and stuff, there's some very good young players there. The biggest thing, I think, to help them develop is to all be under the same roof. They need to be there when the first team are there training, or in the canteen when the first team are there, because it can only be good for them to rub off. Sometimes the first team is to finish training when they're playing a game or something and they can watch. It will be brilliant for the next generation of Bournemouth players. So to get everybody under the same roof is really important now. Instead of them all being in separate areas, it needs to be there. So once that's finished, get everyone over there. It'd be beneficial massively for the club.
Sky's the limit now, by the sounds of it. We've got these owners with huge ambitions, and for us, it's just, where can we go from here? I think one of the things that's key in supporters' minds is having a new stadium. I know that one thing has to come before the other. The training ground complex is underway. A new stadium would be great. A lot of words are always used in association with Bournemouth, like tin pot, but we don't want to be that anymore, and it seems like the new owners are on board with that message as well. So yeah, the sky's the limit. If we can maintain Premier League football, who knows where we can go? European football maybe.
Well, exactly. It's exciting first and foremost. If you can't get excited by it, then you're not. That's why you go as a football fan and get excited by things like this. And I think we've earned it, and the new owners are saying all the right things, so it's exciting. And as you say, mate, minimal has always got to be just remain in the Premier League, which obviously we've managed to do again. Let's keep going with that. But you've only got to look at Brentford, Brighton, Fulham. It can be that you've got to reach for the stars, mate. Do you know what I mean? Let's do it. Who knows? We can keep progressing. It's mad to think we could keep progressing as a football club, because it feels like it's been unbelievable for a long time. But yeah, let's enjoy it and who knows? With what we just spoke about there, no one ever would have believed it. So
In my lifetime, we're going to win the Premiership. Just saying it now. Not now, not in maybe 5 or 10 years, but in 15, 20, 25, 30 years, absolutely. Really 100% believe it. Because you have to as a fan. If you don't believe, you just don't ever win anything, do you?